There's a video I keep coming back to. I'm sure you've seen it. Most people have. But watch it again. Not for the product. Watch the audience. These are not ordinary consumers. These are engineers, developers, people who build things for a living. And they are losing their minds. Not because the phone was pretty, but because something had shifted in the air. Some threshold had been crossed, and they could feel it in real time. That feeling had a name once. They called it the future arriving. I want to ask you something. When was the last time you felt that? Not impressed, not entertained, not mildly interested in a product you might buy in 2 years when the price drops. I mean that specific vertigo, the sensation that the ground has moved, that you are watching the before and after line of history being drawn in real time. Take your time. I'll wait.
It's good to be in something from the ground floor. I came too late for that. I know. But lately I'm getting the feeling that I came in at the end. The best is over.
Tony Soprano said that about the American mafia at the turn of the century. He was eulogizing a dying empire from the inside without quite knowing it. He would recognize that feeling today. The geography is different, but the grief is the same. Silicon Valley built its mythology on a single, load-bearing idea, that it existed at the permanent beginning of things, that the frontier was always open, that the ground floor was always available to someone with a laptop and a vision and a willingness to disrupt. Innovation wasn't just something they did. It was their ontology, their reason for being, the story they told the world, and more importantly, the story they told themselves. And for a while, a brief, strange, electric while, it was true. The transistor, the personal computer, the internet, the search engine, the smartphone. Each one didn't just create a new market. It reorganized human experience. It changed how memory works, how distance works, how loneliness works. That's what genuine innovation does. It doesn't just solve a problem, it makes you forget the world ever existed without it. Now look at what's being offered. Slightly faster chips, slightly thinner glass, subscription models for things that used to be products, AI assistants that confidently tell you the wrong answer to your question, and social platforms that have quietly transformed from communication tools into Skinner boxes optimized for engagement metrics. This is not the future arriving. This is the future stalling.
We wanted flying cars. Instead, we got 140 characters.
Peter Thiel said that in 2011. He meant it as a critique of a tech industry that was slowly moving away from genuinely transformative technology. The irony is that he said it at the beginning of a decade-and-a-half stretch that would give us TikTok, NFTs, the metaverse, and an AI chatbot that will write your passive-aggressive email for you. The 140 characters were the peak. This video is not a eulogy for technology. Technology is fine, and it will survive what I'm about to say. This is a post-mortem on a culture, a particular strain of ambition that emerged in a particular place at a particular moment in history, convinced itself it was permanent and universal, and is now, quietly, expensively, and behind a great deal of PR, running out of things to believe in. The question isn't whether Silicon Valley can still build things. The question is whether it has any idea what things are worth building. We felt the future arrive once. Let's talk about where it went. In 1998, two Stanford graduate students launched a search engine with no marketing budget, no celebrity endorsements, and no Super Bowl ad. Just a white page, a search bar, and an algorithm that was quietly, measurably better than everything else. Within a few years, to Google became a verb, not because anyone told you it should, because the product made itself indispensable before you noticed it was happening. That's the pattern worth understanding, not just what these technologies did, but how they moved. The technologies that genuinely changed the world were what you might call pull technologies. They solved problems so obvious, so universal, and so immediately that adoption happened without persuasion. The product found you. You didn't need to be convinced, only to be introduced. What we've largely been offered for the last decade are push technologies, products that require enormous marketing infrastructure, manufactured urgency, and the nagging implication that you'll be left behind if you don't adopt them. Technology is looking for problems rather than problems that demand the technology. The difference sounds simple. In practice, it's the difference between the internet and the metaverse. We already saw what the iPhone did, but it wasn't alone, and it didn't come from Norway. Consider Netflix. At no point did Netflix have to convince people that watching what they wanted, when they wanted, was better than appointment television. They just had to make it possible. The demand was already there, latent and waiting. These three technologies paint a clear picture. What they share, fundamentally, is that they created their own markets by solving problems people already had, often problems people didn't even know could be solved. There's a model for understanding how technologies mature. It's called the Gartner Hype Cycle, and it charts 5 distinct phases. The first is the innovation trigger. A technological breakthrough surfaces, generating early interest and media attention. What follows is the peak of inflated expectations. Early adopters pile in, the buzz amplifies, and suddenly, this technology is everywhere, even though real-world applications are still largely unproven. Then comes the trough of disillusionment. The promise fails to materialize, interest evaporates, and the technology starts looking like yesterday's news. After that, the slope of enlightenment. Genuine use cases begin to emerge, and a clearer picture of what the technology can actually do starts to solidify. Finally, the curve levels off at the plateau of productivity as mainstream adoption takes hold. The crucial thing to understand, though, is that most technologies never make it that far. They stall in the trough and die there. For example, blockchain technology has had 3 troughs: in the early 2010s, again in the late 2010s, and then in 2022, each with its own accompanying innovation trigger. Looking back on it now, all we see is that the promised revolution in finance, contracts, and digital ownership produced, well, mostly speculation, scams, and a few niche use cases that could have been solved with conventional databases. Similarly, the metaverse was everywhere at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Excitement over this technology peaked in 2021 when Facebook rebranded to Meta. Mark Zuckerberg bet the company on virtual worlds where we'd all have meetings as legless avatars. By 2024, even Meta had shelved most metaverse initiatives, going as far as to announce that they were shutting down VR support for Horizon Worlds in March 2026. That decision was quickly reversed after user backlash, but it's unlikely to receive nearly as much love and attention as it did just a few years ago. In the end, Meta spent over $80 billion since that rebrand, pursuing a future that users simply had no interest in. NFTs, an offshoot of blockchain technology, followed an even more compressed cycle, going from revolutionary digital ownership to punchline in roughly 8 months. The fundamental promise, authenticated digital scarcity, turned out to solve a problem most people just didn't have. What's most disturbing, though, is that the failure of these technologies hasn't slowed down the hype machine. If anything, it's accelerated. That's because all parties involved, from venture capitalists seeking big returns and the media hungry for narratives, to tech corporations desperate for their next hypergrowth ideas, are incentivized to keep creating these cycles. The problem is structural, independent of whether or not the technologies work and there is demand for them. What we're witnessing is, ultimately, a kind of institutional learned helplessness, where companies continue pumping billions into the next big thing, often not because they believe it will work, but because not participating feels more dangerous than wasting resources.
And if we end up misspending a couple of $100 billion, I think that is going to be very unfortunate, obviously. But
the hype cycle itself has become the product. Which brings us to artificial intelligence, the current obsession, the latest savior, the thing that's supposed to make up for the last decade of technological disappointment. And the uncomfortable truth is that AI is different. When ChatGPT launched in November 2022, its growth was meteoric, reaching 100 million users within 2 months, smashing the previous record held by TikTok. And it wasn't just hype. It could do things that most people thought were impossible just months before. But as if following a pre-written playbook, what followed was all too familiar. Every company suddenly had an AI strategy. Every product got an AI feature whether it needed one or not, and the promises, well, the promises were cosmic. AI would cure cancer, end poverty, bring about world peace, solve climate change, replace all jobs, achieve consciousness, and transform humanity.
And what about all the other stuff we're going to do? I mean, give internet to underserved communities, students in the homework gap, refugees, genomic research. Pied Piper can help scientists cure cancer.
And cancer is bad.
Tech journalist Ed Zitron has become one of the generative AI industry's most incisive critics, and his arguments are worth sitting with. The through line through all of his criticism is that the technology is, to quote him, overhyped both economically and technologically. On one hand, neither the AI labs nor AI startups are showing clear paths to profitability. On the other hand, the technology often fails on its promised capabilities. And worst of all, he says, AI showed us, quote unquote, how many people are excited to replace human beings. A quick look at the numbers paints a sobering picture. OpenAI, despite ChatGPT's massive adoption, reportedly loses money on every query. Microsoft has poured tens of billions of dollars into AI infrastructure with unclear returns. Most new data centers that were supposed to come online this year are unlikely to do so, with less than 10% of the promised IT load in active construction right now. Outside of Nvidia, hardly anyone else is making a profit on this boom. And we've seen this play out before. Massive capital deployment, huge user interest, but no sustainable business model. And the technology itself? Sure, it can be quite impressive, but it also hallucinates facts. It often can't perform basic logic. It reproduces biases from its training data. Ultimately, for any work that is of consequence, LLMs will always need some level of human oversight. Whether this is a solvable engineering problem or a fundamental ceiling, nobody actually knows. What we do know is that we're 5 years and hundreds of billions of dollars into this cycle, and we're still debating about whether or not it's transformative. That alone says a lot. Which begs the question, is this the iPhone moment that the tech industry has been so desperate to recreate, or is this just a slightly more useful metaverse? And this rot goes deeper than just one technology. I think that the most revealing story about where tech is right now isn't about the hype cycles at all. It's about what tech companies do when they aren't being swept up in one. In October 2013, Snapchat launched a new feature called Stories. This format allowed users to create chronologically arranged chains of posts that would disappear after 24 hours and were separate from their main feed. It was a genuinely novel idea that established a new paradigm of content permanence. By 2016, Instagram had cloned it. A year later, so had Facebook, and then it was pushed to WhatsApp. YouTube adopted it too, along with LinkedIn and Twitter. At peak saturation, nearly every platform had a stories feature, most of which their users largely ignored. This wasn't innovation. It wasn't even iteration. This was blatant duplication as a competitive defense mechanism, a way to eliminate Snapchat's differentiation by absorbing its defining feature. Then TikTok happened. Its short-form, algorithmically driven, creator-forward vertical video format was an instant hit. Within 2 years of serious Western adoption, Instagram had launched Reels, YouTube had Shorts, and Snapchat launched Spotlight. Even Twitter, a platform that was primarily text first, launched a short video tab. Writer Cory Doctorow has a framework for understanding why this happens. He coined the term enshittification, and this is how he defines it.
Here is how platforms die. First, they are good to their users. Then they abuse their users to make things better for their business customers. Finally, they abuse those business customers to claw back all the value for themselves. Then they die.
This predictable arc that platforms follow results eventually in a heightened focus on extraction and retention, crippling their capacity for genuine risk. Copying a proven format isn't creative failure, it's rational behavior for a platform that has too much to lose by being wrong. When you have 2 billion users and $1 trillion valuation, the correct corporate move is almost never, let's try something nobody has done before. And this is how you end up with an industry that calls itself innovative while producing, in any given year, a new iPhone with slightly better cameras, dozens of streaming services trying to replicate Netflix at its peak, and a social media platform for adults that works exactly like TikTok but with a different logo. The platforms became extractive because they stopped creating. And they stopped creating because the incentive structures of late-stage platform capitalism, such as quarterly returns, market share defense, and acquisition or copy responses to competition, actively punish genuine innovation. The other option, when you can't copy fast enough, is to buy. Look at Instagram, YouTube, WhatsApp, and LinkedIn. These have been the defining platforms of the last 2 decades. All of them were acquired, not built, by the companies that own them now. Innovation happened outside the system, and the system's response was to absorb and institutionalize it. But you can only acquire so many Instagrams before the pool of genuinely new ideas runs dry, and then all you're left with is copying each other. In 2011, venture capitalist Mark Andreessen published an essay in the Wall Street Journal titled Why Software is Eating the World, and for a while, it felt prophetic. Software was eating retail, it was eating media, it was eating finance. But at some point, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly when, the idea curdled, because software ran out of genuinely broken industries to eat and started eating ones that were working fine. Take food delivery. Ordering food from a restaurant has functioned without disruption for most of human history. The restaurant made and delivered the food, or allowed you to pick it up or eat there. This system worked. In many parts of the world, it still does. Then the tech industry set their sights on food delivery and decided that it needed to be disrupted. With venture capital flooding in, so many apps emerged claiming to fix it. The result was a system where restaurants make less money per order, drivers earn below minimum wage after expenses, and customers have to pay a delivery fee, service fee, plus a tip. And the platform, those people that do none of the cooking or driving, take a cut of everything. The food didn't get better, delivery wasn't much faster. The only thing that changed was who captured the value. And the answer, as always, was the platform. Or consider Elon Musk's Hyperloop idea. In 2013, Musk published a white paper proposing a new form of transport, passengers in pods fired through vacuum tubes at over 1,000 kilometers an hour. It was presented as the thing that would make California's planned high-speed rail obsolete. And to be fair, California's high-speed rail project had been a disaster. It was over budget and way behind schedule. But Musk's response to this wasn't to help fix rail. It was to propose replacing it entirely with something that had never been built at any meaningful scale, that faced unsolved engineering problems, and that would be owned by private companies rather than public infrastructure. Today, Hyperloop as a concept is effectively dead. The Boring Company, Musk's tunneling venture, which pivoted from Hyperloop to just, digging tunnels, has produced a Las Vegas convention center loop that moves people at roughly the speed of a car in traffic. Meanwhile, the political oxygen that Hyperloop consumed, the years of headlines, regulatory uncertainty it created, and the implicit argument that we shouldn't waste resources on rail because Hyperloop is coming, arguably set back serious transit investment. This pattern repeats over and over again. WeWork tried to disrupt commercial real estate by basically subletting office space with nicer furniture and calling it a tech company. Juicero tried to disrupt Juice with the Wi-Fi connected $400 press that squeezed proprietary bags. And Theranos tried to disrupt blood testing with a machine that didn't work. The disruption mythology became so tantalizing, so reinforcing, that the industry lost the ability to distinguish between a genuine problem worth solving and an industry that worked fine but could theoretically be platformified to extract more value. And while tech was busy disrupting buses and juice and office furniture, the genuinely broken systems, housing, healthcare, education, mostly got worse. It turns out software doesn't eat everything equally. It eats things where the extraction of value can be automated and the cost can be pushed onto users and workers. Maybe not every industry is there to be disrupted. Maybe the bus, humble, functional, and unglamorous as it is, didn't need a Silicon Valley founder to reimagine it. Maybe it just needed funding, political will, and the kind of sustained vigorous defense that AI has received. The disruption mythology told us that the tech industry should be solving all our problems. Now I'm starting to wonder if that had more to do with valuations than our actual problems. Okay, so where does that leave us? We've witnessed repeated hype cycle that collapsed before reaching utility. We've seen multi-billion-dollar valuations evaporate as big promises fail to materialize. We've watched platforms degrade in quality even as they grow in size. The evidence for stagnation is compelling. But I know things look different from the techno-optimist perspective. Even as ChatGPT fails to generate sustainable revenue, and the metaverse collapses, and crypto becomes the butt of many brutal jokes, the infrastructure being built persists. From cheap compute to open source AI models and cloud platforms, these things aren't vaporware. They are real, improving, and accessible in a way previous technological infrastructure never was. Technology historians would remind us that transformational breakthroughs are always preceded by long periods of apparent stagnation. AI has gone through many so-called winters, periods where public interest waned, but progress continued behind the scenes. And the internet, well, it existed for years before the first killer apps emerged. So maybe AI is like electricity in 1890. Obviously important, clearly transformative, but not yet understood well enough to build the right applications. Or maybe this is just cope. Maybe we're so desperate to uphold the story of progress that we'll perform any mental gymnastics necessary to maintain faith that the next breakthrough is just around the corner. The honest answer is, we don't know, and that uncertainty itself is revealing. Because previous technological revolutions didn't require this much justification, investment, and patience from users. When the technology works, when it solves real problems, adoption happens faster than anyone predicts. The fact that we're still arguing about whether AI is transformative 5 years into massive investment suggests something is different this time. I started working as a software engineer just after COVID. At that point, the gold rush was long over. The stories of young founders in garages changing the world were exactly that, stories, told at all hands meetings by people who had been there. I didn't build the internet. I didn't build the smartphone. I didn't build the social web. I arrived to maintain it. And I've spent time trying to decide whether that's okay, whether there's still anything meaningful to build, whether I came in at the end. After all, Tony was right about the mafia. Its golden age had passed. The conditions under which it flourished, filling cultural gaps and exploiting institutional vacuums, were gone, replaced by something else. The world had changed. I think something similar is true of the particular version of tech that defined the last 30 years. The genuine problems that software was uniquely positioned to solve, search, communication, e-commerce, media distribution, have been solved. The low-hanging fruit is gone. What's left, if we're being honest, is just people grasping at straws, copying each other, disrupting industries that work, generating hype cycles to maintain the illusion of endless growth, pushing raw, new technologies on users without ever asking whether they solve a problem people actually have. I think it's fine to say this out loud, not as nihilism or a rejection of technology, but as a calibration. Because the disruption mythology didn't just produce bad products, it produced a worldview where every problem is solvable if you just find the right platform model for it. Where the inability of tech to fix housing means housing hasn't been disrupted properly yet, not that maybe housing requires something other than disruption. Where the bus is seen as a failure of the imagination rather than a success of public infrastructure. That worldview comes at a cost. It pulls talent, capital, and political attention toward things that don't need saving and away from those that do. There are other ways to think about what technology is for. The right to repair movement, which argues that the things we own should be fixable by us. Open source technologies that resist corporate capture. Decentralized protocols, imagining the infrastructure that doesn't require a platform between every human interaction. These may not generate billion-dollar valuations, but they share something with the technologies I described at the beginning of this video. They start with a real problem and build toward a solution that serves the person using it, not the platform extracting from them. So maybe I did come in at the end. Maybe the specific version of this industry that promised to eat the world has run out of world to eat. But maybe that's fine. Maybe what comes next looks less like disruption and more like maintenance. more like craft, more like deciding that some problems don't need a platform, they need patience, funding, and the kind of work that doesn't make anyone famous. As a software engineer, I still believe in what software can do when it's pointed at something real. I'm just not sure anymore that the tech industry and I always agree on what real means. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.